You know, my friends, I appreciate most highly this reception in St. Louis, but bear in mind that I've got to talk to the whole United States tonight, and you can carry in between times, too. I can't tell you how very much I appreciate this reception on my return to my home state. It touches my heart, right where I am. I thank the governor most sincerely for his cordial introduction, which nobody heard but the radio audience. But I know that when Missouri feels this way, we are on the road to victory, and on November the 2nd, we're going to have a Democratic governor in Missouri and a Democratic delegation in the Congress of the United States. I've been in many a campaign, my friends. I've made 4 strenuous and hard-fought campaigns in the great state of Missouri for United States Senator. But never in my lifetime have I been in a campaign or seen a campaign such as I've been through recently. I became President of the United States 3 years, 6 months, and 18 days ago. We've been through the most momentous period in the history of the world in that time. 26 days after I became President, Germany surrendered unconditionally. 4 months and 21 days after I was sworn in as President of the United States, Japan folded up and surrendered unconditionally. Thus ending the greatest war in the history of the world. I succeeded to the presidency after one of the greatest Democrats that ever lived in this world had been there for nearly 12 years. I was nominated in Chicago with Franklin Roosevelt in 1944 on a Democratic platform, and I have tried to carry out that platform since I've been President of the United States. One of my first and greatest decisions after becoming President of the United States was made just 2 minutes after I was sworn in, and that was the order that the conference to form the United Nations should go forward in San Francisco on the 25th day of April. That conference went forward to a successful conclusion, and the United Nations is working for the peace and welfare of this world right now. Four days after Japan surrendered on September the 2nd, my first policy message went to Congress. That message contained 21 points based on the Democratic platform of 1944, which I'd helped to write. When that message went to Congress, the smear campaign on your president started in all its vile and untruthfully slanted headlines, columns, and editorials. First character assassins, McCormick Patterson saboteurs, all began firing at me, as did the conservative columnists and the radio commentators, not because they believed anything they said or wrote, but because they were paid to do it. In January 1946, I repeated what I thought the government should do, and I've repeated it time and again since that time, and I haven't changed a bit. I'm still the Democrat you nominated in Chicago on the Democratic platform of 1944, and I'm still for Roosevelt's New Deal. Now the saboteurs and character assassins did a lot better job than they intended to do in 1946. They elected that Republican do-nothing 80th Congress, and then they the issues were clearly drawn. We know where the Republicans stand, and we know where the Democrats stand, and I've brought those issues to the country, my friends. I've traveled up and down this nation 22,000 miles since the campaign started, and 9,100 miles on a non-political campaign before the campaign started. I've told the people that there is just one big issue in this campaign, and that's the people against the special interests. The Republicans stand for special interests, and they always have. The Democratic Party, which I now head, stands for the people and always has stood for the people. In 1932, the farmers in this great nation were being foreclosed and were going broke at a terrific rate. I think in 1932, 125,000 farmers were evicted from their farms. The farm income that year, the net farm income was $2,500,000. $2,500,000,000. The total income was $4.5 billion. In 1947, the gross income of the farmers was $30 billion, and their net income was $18 billion. And in 1947, there were less than 800 farm foreclosures. The Democratic Party is responsible for that result and nothing else. And I'll say to you that any farmer in this United States who votes against his own interest, that is, who votes the Republican ticket, ought to have his head examined. One of the first things that this Republican do-nothing 80th Congress did was to hamstring the Commodity Credit Corporation so they couldn't make price support loans to the farmers. When I was over here in Illinois about a month ago, corn was selling down there in southern Illinois at 47 cents below what the support price ought to be because the Commodity Credit Corporation couldn't furnish the bins in which to store that corn. That's a provision that the Republicans put in the Commodity Credit Corporation charter when they renewed it. That's how they love the farmers. They want to bust them just like they did in 1932. When the Democrats took over in 1933, labor was at its lowest ebb. Labor unions had a very small membership at that time, about 3 million. And there were 12 million people walking up and down the streets in this country hunting for jobs that they couldn't get. And one of the first things that the Democratic administration did was to inaugurate a charter for labor, a Bill of Rights for labor known as the Wagner Labor Relations Act. And under that Wagner Labor Relations Act, the wages of labor are 3 times what they were in 1932 and 1933. There are 61 million people at work in this country, and jobs are hunting for people, not people hunting for jobs. And that's the result of Democratic policy. And one of the first bills introduced in this do-nothing Republican 80th Congress was to cripple the Wagner Labor Relations Act. That Taft-Hartley law was passed over my veto. That bill was passed over my veto, and it was passed with the idea of, so the Republican leaders in the Congress said, of putting labor in its place. They wanted to take the bargaining power away from labor, so it could not deal with industry on a fair basis. You know how that came about? That came about because 2/3 of the people in 1946 decided that they did not have an interest in their government, and 2/3 of them didn't vote. Most labor men stayed away from the polls in 1946, and see what they got. They got the Taft-Hartley Act. Now, I'm advising you, as I've advised every audience to whom I've spoken in this United States, that your duty, you owe a duty to the government because the government is yours when you exercise that power to vote. And if you don't vote on November the 2nd, and you send back the 81st Congress under the same leadership that the 80th Congress had, you'll be in some fix sure enough, because the Republicans have already said what they're going to do to labor if they get control of the government. Now, one of the laws which was passed in that period of Democratic administration was a minimum wage law. That minimum wage law was intended to put the floor under wages. It put a floor of 40 cents an hour under wages. That was the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it limited the hours that could be worked to 40 hours a week, and it eliminated child labor. I've been trying to get this 80th Congress ever since January the 3rd, 1947, when it met the first time, to raise that standard, that floor under wages, to 75 cents an hour. They refused to do that. And I thought maybe a remedy would be, if I could manage it, and I can't, of course, but I'd like to see those Republican congressional leaders try to live in Washington on $16 a week and support a family. The Democrats have believed always that the welfare of the whole people should come first. And that means that the farmers, labor, small businessmen, and everybody else in the government should have a fair share of the prosperity that goes around. We've placed the farmers in the best position they've ever been in the history of the world. We've placed labor in its best position it's ever been in the history of the world. And we've been against monopoly from the start. Now, when farmers are prosperous and when labor gets good wages, business is bound to be good. And that's the reason the national income is higher in this country than it's ever been before in the history of the world. You know, these Republican old dealers and these fellows, these special privileged fellows, farmers that labor's getting too much pay, and that's the reason for the high cost of living. And they tell the laborers that the farmer's getting too much for his crops, and that's the reason for the high cost of living. Well, I'll tell you what the reason is. There's a fellow in between there who's getting too much profit. That's what the difficulty is. The income of the great corporations in 1932 was $3 billion minus on the red side of the ledger. In 1947, it was $17 billion plus on the right side of the ledger. And the Democrats bluff that about two. Don't let anybody tell you anything different about that. Now, I asked in this 21-point program to which I referred in the beginning for a housing bill. 3 years ago, I asked for that housing bill. That was the Wagoner-Ellender-Taft bill. That bill was a housing bill which was in the interest of all the people. It was mainly fixed to help low-income people, to clear slums, and to help the cities get low-rent housing. Well, that bill was killed in the House of Representatives. And then in 1947, it was reintroduced. And it was known as the Taft-Ellender-Wagner bill. You see, they reversed it a little bit. And I sent message after message to the Congress to get that bill passed. Well, they didn't pass it. They passed a fake housing bill. A housing bill which was intended to build no housing. And they're trying to make you believe they passed a housing bill. Of all the fake campaigns, this one is the top so far as the Republican candidate for president is concerned. He's been following me up and down this country, making speeches about home and mother and unity and efficiency and things of that kind. He won't talk about the issues, but he did let his foot slip when he endorsed the 80th Congress. He endorsed that Congress. He said that Congress had done great things for the future of this country. It's done great things for the special interests in this country. It's worked for the lobbies. The worst lobby outfit that's ever in the history of the United States has been in Washington surrounding that 80th Congress, and they haven't done a thing that these good-for-nothing lobbyists haven't asked them to do. The reason we couldn't get that housing bill passed was because the real estate lobby was sitting at the rat hole and wouldn't let it come out of the committee. I asked that Congress to do something about high prices. In fact, I called them back into session twice. special session and begged them with everything I had to do something about the inflationary price spiral that was going on. Oh no, they couldn't do that, but they could pass a rich man's tax bill, a tax bill that benefited the fellows at the top income bracket, but didn't do the poor boys any good. I want to show you why they passed that bill. Read you one of their campaign documents, which is a record of what the Republicans believe. Now, that rich man's tax bill, which I vetoed 3 times, they had to pass it 3 times before they could make a law out of it, gave a fellow who's getting $60 a week a saving of about $1.58 a week. And the price spiral has taken that all away from him, going on out through the roof and taken some of his savings away from him, too. But that same tax bill gave a fellow who's getting $100,000 a year $16,658.44 in savings. And that's 4 times the net salary of the President of the United States. Well, you know why they did that? Here's what this thing says. There's money in your pocket. Now, this is a document sent out in a number of the states to the Republican state committees because the Republican 80th Congress reduced your income tax. The following table shows your approximate savings under the new tax saving law effective May the 1st, 1948, after I vetoed it 3 times. Now, listen to this. This is outrageous. This is one of the most terrible political documents ever I saw. It's good. Do you want more of this sort of constructive government action? Then use your tax savings to make a substantial investment in a Republican victory. In other words, you fellas that are getting all this saving on this tax income thing that we gave you, send it to us so we can spend it to beat the Democrats. That's literally what that means. Now, there's another issue between me and this Congress on which we didn't agree. Now, there's education. There was an education bill to help the state introduced into this Congress, and it passed the Senate. And it provided $300 million to be allocated to the states on the same basis that we allocate the road money to help build roads. But the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives wouldn't let the House vote on that bill. They are not interested in whether teachers have good pay or not. They're not interested in whether the kids get the proper education or not. They don't care if there are 75 or 80 kids in one room and one teacher has to look after them at a salary that's not on living wage. They're not interested in that. And I want to say to you that I think it's just as important to see that these children get the proper sort of place to go to school and the proper sort of teachers to teach them as it is to build roads for them to ride in buses over the roads to school. Then I asked this Congress to do something about the health of people in this country. I asked them for health insurance. I asked them for hospitals. You know, in this country, there are 2 classes of people that get all the medical care that they ought to have. And that's the fellow who's got $1 million at this end of the scale and the fellow who hasn't got a cent at this end. But the people in the middle, the big, large number of people in the middle between those 2 classes, can't afford to go to a hospital, and they can't afford to pay what it costs sometimes, and they can't afford sometimes even to pay the doctor bill after they get service. And I wanted an insurance program that would work so that the fellow would have a little money saved up when it came time to pay medical and hospital bills, and the doctor in the hospital would get paid promptly, but the Republicans are against that. They say that's socialized medicine. Well, it isn't. That's just good common sense. And some of these days we're going to get it because the Democrats are going back in power, and you're going to see it. We get it. Now, my friends, I've been all over this United States, from one end to the other. And when I started out, the song was, well, he can't win. The Democrats can't win. And 90% of the press is against us. But that didn't discourage me one little bit, you know. I had 4 campaigns here in the